2, 3, 4.
Is it a scarf or is it half of a sweater? From what I've heard, it could be a third of a poncho. There's no excuse now not to be knitting, 'cause you can do it standing and you can do it sitting.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Truly Myrtle podcast. I'm Libby and this is episode 86. I think that's right, episode 86. It's really nice to have you back with me. You can find me all over the internet as Truly Myrtle. I'm Truly Myrtle Photos on Instagram, so come and say hi. It's always nice to see you there. Are you joining in our knit along? We've got a knit along running in the Ravelry group at the moment. It's a shawl and wrap and cowl knit along. So if you fancy knitting yourself a wrap or a shawl or a cowl from one of my patterns, come and join us. It's really fun. There's lots of people there. It's so neat seeing what everyone's making. There's people from the Northern Hemisphere making things for spring, and there's people from the Southern Hemisphere making cozy things for autumn. So come and join us. It runs right to the middle of May, so you're not too late. There's plenty of time. I'd love to see you there. I'll put links to everything I talk about in the show notes. I'm going to leap straight into the podcast this week because I have an interview for you. It's with the very lovely Meg McElwee from Sew Liberated. Meg has been sewing for years and she has had sewing patterns out for quite a long time. She's had a bit of a break over the last few years, but she's back. You'll hear all about that in the podcast. And I just wanted to talk to her because I love her take on sewing as sort of looking after yourself and sewing as self-care and trying to take some of the stress out of sewing, and I think making, to just enjoy the process, accept that it's never going to be perfect. It's going to take time. You're always going to make mistakes. It's always fun to learn new things, but actually if you can do that, if you can really embrace that, oh, it's so lovely. I know most of you will already understand, so I thought Meg was the perfect person to bring on the show. Before we leap into the interview though, thank you everyone who entered the giveaway for the socks book, the socks ebook. I've drawn a winner with my random number generator. There were lots of you, but over 100 of you entered. The winner was Kylie Hall. So get in touch with me, Kylie, and I'll get you a copy of the ebook. Kylie said, loved the podcast. Those trousers are lovely, look super comfy. They are, they really are. And those are Meg's pattern, who we'll be talking to in a minute. Kylie said, I really liked Providence and Origin out of the Socks 18 patterns. I liked how the pattern changed, so second sock syndrome would be easier to overcome. I have some Icelandic yarn I want to make into socks, and I thought I would pair it with some mohair. Sounds good, doesn't it? I like the sound of that. Lots of you had ideas for sock yarn without nylon. I'm really pleased that so many of you want to give it a go and have actually started thinking about it a little. So let me know if you've got any special treats. Just keep that information coming because I'm really curious to hear more about what's out there. Shall we get on with this interview? I will see you in a couple of weeks. If I don't manage to record, it's because my kids are on holiday at the end of next week, but I will try. I'll do my very best to get you a podcast sometime in a couple of weeks' time. See you later. Thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoy the interview.
It'd be really nice if we started by you could tell me your story and how you got started, especially how you got started with this whole kind of reaching out to other people, because that's quite a big change in our sewing lives, isn't it? When we go from, or our making lives, when we go from making for us all of a sudden to finding a community. How did that happen for you?
Well, I started in the community back when blogs were first a thing, back in 2007. And I was at the time living in rural northern Mexico. I was a Montessori teacher, so I had a ton of time on my hands, and I just started sewing. I had this old sewing machine down there and hardly any fabric, but I worked with what I had, and I got involved in the community. Initially, I was doing. So I'm going to take my earbud out so I don't echo. And initially, I was just sewing for the classroom. Like I would make these little Montessori materials and beautiful little folders for the kids and little aprons and whatnot. And then I started sewing clothes for myself. And I started just sharing on my blog. And the blog kind of was a driving force for a long time. It was so great. I mean, I just got an email from someone who had sewn up my metamorphic dress, and she's out in Portland, Oregon, and she said, "Oh, I'm loving it. I'm loving wearing it. The weather's beautiful here. My friend Chelsea took these pictures," and I'm like, "Wait, Chelsea, I know this person. She was one of my first original readers way back when." And it's like, so it's kind of this world that it seems kind of small, but we're all over the world and we're all connected by this love of making. And while the blog isn't so much a thing anymore, it's more Instagram now and all that. It's it's so great. It's so great to really feel like you know people. I mean, I don't have that many friends right around me who are sewists, and I do have a crafting night. I went out with a few of my friends and I was knitting and whatnot last night. But in general, like to be able to connect with these other people who are also somewhat obsessed online, it's great.
And I think the other lovely thing is this. It's this kind of community that stretches everywhere and around the world, but it's also over this long period of time. So you watch things happen in people's lives and you sort of follow them. It's quite an unusual thing, and we're all sort of evolving together, I think. I really like that about it. There's actually quite deep friendships that you form with people, aren't there?
There really are. I don't know if you knew about my experience and I paused Sew Liberated for a while, but my son was born with a congenital heart defect and was really sick, and I announced it on my blog. This was more than 7 years ago now, and it was amazing, the outpouring. Not only did we receive handmade blankets and tiny little baby clothes that were all open front because we knew he would be, he would have heart surgery, he would have all these monitors and whatnot. I mean, it was all so very thoughtful, but also people saying, "Oh, my child had this," or we dealt with this as a family, and now look, here we are. And I just hope to be able to provide that now, now that we're kind of beyond that sort of scary period, and I'm able to focus more on my passion of sewing. I hope that someone sees me and my child and says, "Oh, you've been through a really rough time. We all go through those periods, and you emerge, like you come out on the other end." And it's a great support that way. I connected with another fellow sewing blogger after Lachlan was born. She was pregnant with her third child and got the same diagnosis as my son. And I remember we just call. I was like, "Forget the email stuff. Call me. Let's talk. Let's talk about this experience." And it's just this instant connection. And sewing people are just good people.
There's something. There's just that little magic something, isn't there? That you all understand each other. Yeah. Like
we can touch it. There's like a depth of. I mean, even though we're putting out pictures of hand sewn, hand knit garments, there's also it's like we're putting our lives out there, and to a certain extent, and talking about the memories that we had while we were knitting, or where were we knitting, what were we doing, what's going on in our lives. So it's more than just the fiber.
Yeah, there's a lot of personal on the outside, isn't there? It's just your real self, I think, on the outside. But things really did change for you a lot at that time. That must have been really scary. I first came across you years ago because I did your craftsy class when I was still living at.
Did you really?
Yeah, I was still living in England, and I was just getting. I think I was before I started my blog, or I was just getting into it. Anyway, all this online world suddenly became alive for me. I was completely. I didn't know anything was online until about 2010. And then all of a sudden I realized there was this online world. And it must have been just a bit after that I did your craftsy class. Maybe it was just a couple of years later.
Must have been.
Yeah, that'd be about right. That's when I started my blog. Yeah, and I loved it. I've made so many t-shirts, and I've just self-drafted a lot of them. But I've been through this whole phase. Oh yeah, so I absolutely loved your stuff. And then you went really quiet, and I hadn't really caught up because I was moving.
That was my last push. That was my last push. Lachlan had 2 surgeries. So he was born, and my second book came out, called Growing Up Sew Liberated, and it was intense. You know, people talk about birthing books. I mean, it's an intense process. I had a 21-month-old and a newborn with a serious heart defect, and so I was just muscling through it. I mean that whole time for me, from when he was born until his second surgery was over, when he was about 5 months old. I think this is when we got out of the hospital. I mean, it was just, I was just, as you can imagine, running on complete fumes. And so that happened, and he was about a year old when I did the craftsy class, and my husband was in school, so he was getting, poverty level wages at grad school. Sew Liberated was what was sustaining our family. So I was just powering through it, and I did the craft class. It came out, and I was just depleted. I was just completely burnt out. And Patrick ended up getting a job as a computer programmer. He left his PhD program, which ended up being a really good decision. We got to see where we are and forget the stress of that. He has a great job now. You saw him earlier trying to help connect us on Skype, but he works from home. So it's a great setup we have. But yeah, once the craftsy class came out, he started working full time, and I just kind of focused on the kids. I mean, it was a lot. It was just a lot of work to do. There was so much emotional stuff. I think both of my boys at that time, my eldest being just a toddler when all that happened. So we just healed. I just slowed everything down. I kind of went inward a little bit, and I handed off the business to employee Danica, who did a nice job. I mean, I like literally, there are patterns that came out that I have like no hand in, because I just couldn't. I just couldn't, like, guys, just do it. I trust you, and I'll get back to you once I got my mojo back. Again. She always finds my laugh when the kids aren't around. It's like she can sense an adult with available hands for petting. So here she is. Yeah. So I just did that for a long time, and it just went on autopilot. And it wasn't until my daughter Sadie was born that I kind of felt a desire to get back into the sewing, and sewing for self-care. It was no longer, Sew Liberated wasn't about earning a certain amount of money. I mean, we were okay because my husband had his job, and so I could approach it from a different sort of foundation, a foundation of being fulfilled in my life, being with my little kids, him doing his thing, and that this was going to be my creative outlet, and so that's what it is for me now. And I rarely say yes to any sort of extra, design. If I'm working with a magazine, sometimes I'll work with Taproot. But any blog tours, blog posts, I just kind of say yes only to what I can fit into my life right now. And so I don't have that sort of pressure of, you gotta fit this in, you gotta meet this deadline. My kids are still young, so I have to, I just have to make sure that it's a joy for me and not a requirement.
That is tricky when it is your job as well. I think it's a double thing. I think I think for people who don't make it their job, sometimes even that can be tricky, because I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to finish things or to do things perfectly, and there's so many extra pressures we decide we have to do, and quite aside from making it your job as well.
Like I need to make this for myself. Like, I need this in my wardrobe. Right? I mean, my whole thing is, if you need the pair of jeans, just go to the thrift, just like just don't feel like you need to have a completely handmade wardrobe. I mean, it's just take that pressure off of yourself. It needs to come from a place of joy. If not, you'll look at the jeans and you'll be like, oh, you like all of the time and the toil and the stress of it. Like, you won't feel good wearing them, like you gotta enjoy the process so that the item is infused with this good feeling, this good memory, this joy, as opposed to, guilt, like looking at it and thinking, oh man, like I just powered through that and I didn't sleep. And the day after I snapped at my kids and it was, yeah. So that's kind of how I approach it.
You start with that. I mean, this whole idea, I for ages, I've had this idea because it works with kids and my kids, is to break things into little chunks. And to try and, if I'm going to do something, think about, okay, how am I going to do it? Rather than just sort of randomly going at it, trying to think, okay, well, I'm just going to do that. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to get the pattern out of the packet and plan to get it printed or whatever. I just little chunks. Do you do something like that? Or have you got a different?
I do. I sew in little spurts. I'm not a night sewer. I'm a person who needs a lot of sleep, so I don't stay up after the kids are in bed. Occasionally I will, but it just doesn't end up well for me or my family. So as much as I enjoy having just unlimited time, say my husband, my parents have the kids or something, and I have just this day or this afternoon to just sew, that's awesome. I love that, but it doesn't happen often. So I just try to do a seam here and a seam there, and that's worked well. Audiobooks with my kids, like we'll all listen to an audiobook now that my youngest is 4. We find a few good ones that everyone agrees on. That's kind of can provide sort of a quiet time, a quiet space for me to get some time in. But more often than not, right now, it's a little more complicated for me right now because I have several patterns that are designs that are kind of in the works, and so I'm not just sewing, I'm sewing and writing instructions, and that adds a little.
I know.
I'm sure you understand, right? Right.
I know exactly. And so I sort of try and plot what I'm doing around, okay, so if I know that I'm going to have to write that while I'm doing that, and I'm going to have to think about that. So that is a kid-free moment. So what else can I do in the meantime? I better start something else.
Yes.
I
know. I have little socks on my needles at all times now where I'm like, I need a little moment of centering, but it's not, I'm not going to be writing technical directions. So I'm just gonna knit something, and something easy.
Yeah. And I suppose I do that now with sewing as well, so that I have things planned for sewing. So my knitting is sort of my work thing, although I do have a few dishcloths on the go because honestly they're so easy. And I'm desperate for some more dishcloths at the moment. But for me, trying to keep the sewing is that sort of, okay, I'll just have a break from what I'm doing for my knitting and I'll go back to my sewing and I'll just, this is...
And I do the same thing with knitting. Like it's this sacred space, and I have ideas for knitwear design, but I'm just not going there. I'm not going there because there are so many wonderful designers like you out there. I am not like, that's my sacred craft. I mean, sewing, yes, it is as well, but I just am not going to make that into a product ever. I just need that
conversation with myself a lot. No, you're not going to do that. Don't make everything you do. Yeah. But for someone that does, so for someone who is, because I get a lot of people contact me about wanting to turn their, knitting into a business. Do people contact you about that with sewing? Have you got anything you would say to them, or?
Occasionally. I feel like I left the scene back in 2012 for a while, and I came back and it had just totally shifted. there are a lot more indie pattern designers than back, 2008 to 2012. And from my understanding, there are some classes that are out now that it's like online, kind of teach yourself pattern drafting and pattern grading and how to do all that stuff. So I think that shifted the landscape a little bit. And I think that the information is way more accessible now than it was. I don't know if it's the same with knitting.
Definitely been that explosion. There's definitely been a big explosion of designers from that around that same time when there were sort of a key few people, and then it's just boomed. Yeah. Which is good. It's really good. It just means there's so much more available. It's an exciting. Yeah. Yes, and it can be
overwhelming. I mean, just to keep up with my own Instagram feed and what people are putting out there, and the number of new patterns that come out. I mean, I have this feeling right now where there's a little bit of like, well, should I continue to like produce like, I don't want to add to people's plates. I don't want them to feel like, oh, I just need to sew that, and then all of like have the stress level rise. Like, I don't want to do that.
I think you should keep going because your pens are fantastic. But so tell me about, because I just sewed your trousers for you, which have just been, I absolutely love them. Yeah. They're fantastic. And so I hope it's gone really well with the trousers because they are great.
It was a really overwhelming response to the pants. I didn't expect it. It was my biggest launch yet to date. And I thought that nothing could kind of outdo the metamorphic dress and the reception. But I mean, I think that that people want to be comfy and B like they I think that the appeal of the pants is that the shape of them is a little different. They look like they're like secret pajamas, like, and but they can be dressed up too. They're not like the Hudson pant, for example, which I think looks great. I haven't sewn myself a pair, but they're knit. They're definitely joggers, and the kind of walk the line between dressy pants and joggers. So
perfect, fun. I think. But you've got a few more with that. Because I love the elastic waistband. I mean, I a few weeks ago on my podcast, I talked about how I'd been wearing elastic waistbands through the summer, and I was saying, but actually now I have these. I'm not sure I'll ever want to go back because they're so comfy. But I see that you've got a skirt coming soon with a similar waist. I'm looking forward to that. It's very similar. You've got a bunch of new things coming at the moment. So I'm solely
dress. But I'm really excited about the dress. It's called the Hinterland dress, and it's just a classic dress. That with the button, option for a half button down placket or a full button placket. And it's going to come in sleeveless, short sleeve, and 3/4 sleeve. So it's just kind of versatile. And I haven't seen anything like it, surprisingly, given that it's sort of a simpler design. But I don't see that there's an option for something like that. So it's like, I kind of need something like that in my own wardrobe. So that's what I'm going to work on. Yeah. After that, I think I'll slow down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you've got this whole sort of bubble that's just come along, so everyone can be busy making gazillion, different versions of those. I think it's fantastic. But for people who are watching, I get, lots of messages from people who knit, who tell me that they really want to sew, or they're just starting to sew. It sounds like lots of people write to me and tell me I've inspired them to start sewing and have a go. So would you recommend, which of your patterns do you think would be good to start with? And give them have you got any tips that you would give them about starting to sew so it doesn't feel overwhelming and feels manageable?
So I think that if you're starting to sew, the ideal thing to do is to find a local shop and take a beginner class. I think that YouTube is excellent, that you can glean a lot of information from tutorials there. But it's this overwhelm of information. You don't quite know where to start. And I think that if you're just starting out with it, maybe this is just the way I learned, but when I learned how to knit, it was the same way. Like I had the Stitch and Bitch book, and I was, reading through looking at the diagrams. This was before really the internet took off. But what really allowed me to learn was sitting next to someone in grad school, and she would knit every lunch break, and I would knit next to her. And it took the anxiety for me out of, well, if I make a mistake, I'm a beginner. I don't know how to fix it. I think that that's the biggest hurdle for people when they're starting off with something new. It's like, yes, of course, yes, you can sew, you can probably figure out your machine from a YouTube tutorial, but it's that anxiety. What happens if I don't understand, or if I mess up? And so if you take like a beginner garment making class at your local shop, I think that it's invaluable to just give you that confidence to then move forward and then say, okay, now I need to learn how to sew inseam pockets. Google inseam pockets, like that kind of thing.
Just coming at it, with a bit more confidence. Mm.
Yeah. As far as patterns, I have a pattern. It's a very, very basic tee. It's called the Strata Top, and that's probably my simplest pattern. It's only available in Taproot magazine for a while. I don't know what shipping is like for you guys out there to get.
For America, it's pretty bad, but that's
okay.
It's
pretty bad, right? Eventually, it's going to be on my available on my site, and that's a great place to start because it's just a front and a back and some binding and some hems, and you're kind of done. That would be a really simple way to start. And then the next pattern I would recommend might be the schoolhouse tunic or the metamorphic dress. Now, there are a lot of beginners, like we're talking like people who might have sewed 30 years ago, in a home ec class, who haven't touched a sewing machine since, or people who were just like, I really want to sew that metamorphic dress. Do you think I can do it? I was like, yeah, I think you can. Like there's a little video tutorial for how to do what's called the burrito method, which is the way for making the dress reversible. So I put a little video tutorial together for that. So it kind of takes the mystery out of that. I try to write my directions so that my husband can sit down and sew the item. I try to be clear enough so that someone who hasn't sewn before would likely understand, depending on, and illustrate them a lot, like provide a lot of illustrations. So yeah, that would be my suggestion, to maybe start with a Strata Top. There are lots of other patterns that are sort of similar in that vein. Sonia Phillip, who does 100 Acts of Sewing, has some really great simple line beginner patterns that I would also recommend to someone who's just starting out. Creative Bug has some great classes too. I mean, yes, there's my class on Craftsy, which is if you want to sew with knits, it's great.
Good, because you don't need an overlocker. It's brilliant.
Yes. And my friend Ray Hoekstra just came out with a series of classes that are on Creative Bug, and she's showing how to make some of her simple patterns. So again, that's great for someone who's just hasn't touched a machine in a long time and wants someone to walk them through each step of making the pattern online. If you don't have the option of taking a class in person, that would be a good start.
Yeah, but just getting your head in the right place and just starting. That's the hardest thing, isn't it? Just starting. So yeah,
it is. It is. Yeah. I was thinking about the analysis paralysis thing, right? I'm actually listening right now to Gretchen Rubin's The Four Tendencies book. I don't know.
You know it. It's so interesting. What are you?
I'm a questioner.
I am such a questioner.
With upholder tendencies.
I think we're the same. I'm a questioner. I did wonder if I was an upholder, and then I thought, I think I can let things go. I think I'm just a questioner. I think. Yeah. I hope. Yeah. I'm definitely a questioner, and it's interesting
in the responses that I get back from people who are making my patterns, or that, you know, they send me a question. Of course, most of the people sending me questions are questioners, which makes sense, right? And so many people are overwhelmed by this analysis paralysis when it comes to choosing fabrics. It's like a big stumbling block for people to get into sewing. Do you understand?
Totally understand that. And I think with midlife, with my current hormonal change, I am worse than ever.
Yes.
I am so bad. I cannot choose. I'm just like, oh, and then I worry. Oh, I'm not sure if that's or would that be? Oh God, it's absolutely terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So tell me what the answer is.
I think you can't go wrong with natural fibers. I think in general, stick with natural fibers and you'll be good. But I'm a huge fan of Tencel or lyocell is another word for it. It's like not too difficult to sew with, but very comfortable to wear, and also not as questionable for the environment as, say, like a rayon might be. I'm just learning about the kind of environmental impacts of some of the fibers. So yeah, I just learned that rayon, where I and I could be wrong about this, but the process for making it, I think it can be made with a bamboo or like a hard wood, but it's so many chemicals are used in the process of making it, that even though it's made from a natural ingredient, it's not a natural source. It's not environmentally sound. So so I'm kind of like, oh, rayons now, but I do hear that Tencel is better, and lyocell, which is the generic term for Tencel. Tencel, like,
I think Tencel's eucalyptus, isn't it? Have I got that right? I have a feeling it's eucalyptus, but I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it is interesting once you start digging back into these things, because that can be a little bit overwhelming too, can't it? When you're trying to find ethical silks and of course not organic cotton is a problem, and
and going into, what do you call them there? An op shop, a thrift store? What do you say? An op shop. Okay. Can be an overwhelming experience if you need a certain amount of yardage to make a pattern, or just you bring the kids with you and they're like, oh, I want this. Can I get this? Can I get this? And you're like, well, I understand that it only costs 50 cents and you're excited to spend some of the money that you've earned. I understand that. I'm concerned because our house is only, like this big, and I'm not sure you need that. So anyway, I try to avoid those situations. But I can find, if I'm not with my children, I can spend the time to find some good yardage at my op shop. There's that, and I just recommend that people be, well, again, it's a fine line, like being okay with making a mistake while you're sewing, and being like, oh, I didn't cut the right size, or the whole muslining process. I do recommend it, but then there's what happens if it doesn't fit, and I've invested this time and I've invested money, or what's going to happen to the fabric. And I always try to my fabric storage is basically like, I have very little yardage. I only purchase yardage or source yardage when I know, like, this is my next project, down the line. So my fabric storage is actually all remnants and pieces, muslins that I've made that haven't quite worked out, and I try to use that for making clothes for my kids. And eventually, eventually I'm gonna quilt. That's so like it's not an overwhelming amount of fabric, but I feel better about the process that way. Like I'm being more mindful about my consumption, and in only keeping a small amount of yardage for my projects, and having this kind of this quilt shopping space. Eventually, I was like, I like it's like glass doors, and I was like, looking at it. And I'm like, yes, I like these colors together. I can envision these quilts eventually emerging once my kids are teenagers and don't really care to spend quite as much time with me. So yeah, I'm enjoying that process, but I think it's important. I think it's important to be okay with making mistakes and to know that a failed muslin isn't a waste of your time, because right? How many times do you rip out? Do you from a sweater, right? Like knitting, I feel like it's more accepted that you can just whoop. Oh, that's part of the process. Like, oh, I didn't catch that mistake in time, but that's okay. You just kind of go back and you start over again, and you sort of factor that, since it's a slower craft, and that you're dedicating quite a bit of time to it. I like to kind of transfer that philosophy over into sewing as well.
It's a good idea, actually. I hadn't thought about it like that, because I do come at it, I guess, with an expectation that sewing is my quicker craft, but actually it doesn't have to be. Yeah. It can be something that's just is also, I can pace myself, and I'm just really good friends with my unpicker. Or my seam ripper. I just accept, and I think knitting's helped me with that, so that I'm like, okay, I've got this massive tolerance for going backwards now, so I just go backwards.
But on a pod, that's all about.
Just deep breath,
part of the
breathe in and rip, 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 rip. Okay, I'm building resilience. This is good for me.
For sure.
No, that's fantastic. Oh, it's been so lovely to talk to you, Meg. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I wish you all the best with your new patterns that are coming out and everything. Thank you. No, it's absolutely fantastic.
There's no excuse now not to be knitting, 'cause you can do it standing and you can do it sitting. Is it a hat, or is it the start of a blanket? Maybe a ball, or even a shawl for a baby. There's no excuse now not to be knitting, 'cause you can do it standing and you can do it sitting. Take out your needles, we're casting on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I got a fish, I love you. You can do it, Mary. You can do it, John. Is it a gnome or some other homely creation? Wait and see. It might even be for a teapot. There's no excuse now not to be knitting, 'cause you can do it standing and you can do it sitting. Take out your needle, we're casting on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I got a fish, I love you. You can do it, Mary. Yeah, you can do it, Mary. You can do it, Mary. And you can do it, John. Gilbert, what are you knitting? There. What are you knitting?
Nothing, man. I crochet.